were often studied to better understand God's creation, which indicates that science functioned in the service of religious understanding rather than as an independent discipline. So, since some of the ideas have mentioned by Miss Jet earlier, I think I just like to emphasize, the curriculum used by the earliest university in the world, which is the University of Bologna. So they actually was the first university who integrated the trivium and the quadrivium foundation. So this is a kind of pattern or system where they teach first grammar, logic, and rhetoric to develop the students' language, reasoning, and communication skills, which are really essential for interpreting religious texts. After mastering this, students proceeded to the quadrivium, which includes the arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, and music, which emphasize mathematical and scientific reasoning. Now, this educational structure helped prepare scholars and was later adopted by the other early universities, which are mentioned by Ms. Montejo. So, this creates a systematic approach to learning while still connecting, intellectual study with the understanding of God's creation. So again, as mentioned by the early resource speakers, religious institutions played a crucial role in the development of early universities, mainly by establishing, funding, and organizing centers of learning. Many universities developed from cathedral schools, run first by the church, where scholars were trained, and those subjects such as theology and philosophy and the study of nature were incorporated in the curriculum. So, yeah, that's all from me, sir, for this question. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ma'am Fulgencio. So indeed, you answered are all aligned with our summary, which is handmaidens of faith. This approach, which integrated theology and natural science, helped shape the academic structure we recognize today. I mean, looking back on history, curriculum is evolving and changing, and theology and religion and religious institution help it to become what is it today. So in similar way, the science curriculum in the Philippines, such like in the Department of Education or in that, it incorporates a well-rounded education, blending scientific inquiry with the development of critical thinking skills, much like medieval institutions fused faith and reason, preparing students for both intellectual and spiritual understanding. Thank you so much for your answer for our first probing question. In what ways did the doctrines and religious authorities of the medieval church promote or hinder the pursuit of scientific inquiry during the Middle Ages? So since these questions were given ahead of time, so let's dig deeper on the answers from our resource person. So according to Montejo, the church they are the promoter and gatekeeper of knowledge. But according to Ma'am Pop Jargon, the church serves as a protector and limiter of science. And also, from our another resource person, church serves as editor of inquiry. So let's start with analyzing these answers from our first resource person, which is Ma'am Montejo. Ma'am Montejo, you have now the virtual floor to explain further why does church serves as promoter and gatekeeper of knowledge.
Hello again, everyone. So, for me, church is a promoter and gatekeeper of knowledge. So, during the Middle Ages, the doctrines and the religious authorities of the church both promoted and at times limited scientific inquiry. So, on one hand, the church supported learning because many scholars believed that studying the natural world was a way to understand God's creation. Kaya maraming monasteries and cathedral schools became the centers of education. So where subjects like mentioned in the previous question, like the astronomy, mathematics, and medicine were taught alongside theology. Many medieval thinkers tried to harmonize faith and reason. For example, scholars like Thomas Aquinas used philosophical ideas from Aristotle to explain Christian teachings. This intellectual approach encouraged logical thinking, debate, and systematic study methods that later influenced the development of science. So, however, the church could also hinder scientific inquiry. When new ideas seem to contradict the established doctrine or the traditional interpretations of the scripture. So because the church was a major authority in medieval society, so scholars sometimes had to be careful about presenting ideas that challenge accepting beliefs. So in some cases, teachings that appeared to conflict with religious doctrine were discouraged or rejected. So in many ways, the medieval church had a complex rule. So on one side, it provided the institutions, education, and intellectual framework that allowed learning to grow. So but on the other side, its authority sometimes set boundaries on what ideas could be openly explored. Sa madaling sabi, the church was both a supporter of learning and a gatekeeper of knowledge during the Middle Ages.
Thank you so much, Ma'am Montejo. So before we hear the reactions of our co-resource speaker, let's have first the idea of Ma'am Pop Jargon and why she concluded that the church serves as a protector and limiter of science. Ma'am?
All right, sure. Um, I'm thinking, I think the best way to look at it is to understand the church's underlying motivation. They weren't preserving ancient texts or pursuing science just for the sake of science. No? Rather, they were doing it for religious advancement. Because of that specific motivation, the church acted as well both a massive promoter, but at times a strict roadblock to scientific inquiry. To start with how they promoted it, as historians like David Lindbergh pointed out, after the Roman classical schools collapsed, the church essentially became the sole engine keeping literacy and learning alive. During the Carolingian reforms, you had religious figures like Alcuin of York turning monasteries and cathedral schools into massive hubs for collecting, correcting, and copying classical scientific texts. If they hadn't done this, so much of that ancient knowledge would have been completely lost in history. They also actively encouraged scientific study whenever it served practical ecclesiastical needs. For instance, monasteries relied heavily on applied astronomy just to regulate the mandatory daily prayer schedules. They even developed a highly specialized mathematical science called computus, specifically to calculate the shifting dates for Easter and other religious feast days every year. Because during that time, there were no calendars. They had to look at the stars and see what month it is, etc. No? And on top of that, the church provided vital high-level patronages to the early universities. Popes stepped in to guarantee these schools special privileges, granting them immunity from local taxation and jurisdiction, and allowing them to maintain a degree of self-government. So just as enrolling as a student typically conferred clerical status, placing you directly under the authority and protection of the church. So, malakas sila as a church. That's why they're able to progress. Add in the fact that heavy-hitting theologians like Anselm of Canterbury and Peter Abelard were actively promoting the use of reason and philosophical methods to investigate theology. And you had an environment where intellectual inquiry could really flourish. But, on the other hand, the church definitely hindered and stifled scientific advancement when it felt threatened. Because, remember their motivation? They control the intellectual space. Religious authorities occasionally intervene with strict censorship and bans when scientific teachings appeared to conflict with Christian doctrine. So these reasons, well, it's a give and take, but all in all, maybe it was more on advancing science in that regard.
Thank you so much, Ma'am, for that very comprehensive discussion. Now let's hear from our last resource speaker, which is Ma'am Fulgencio, about editor of inquiry.
Thank you, sir. So I was really interested actually with what Ma'am Je mentioned earlier. So I do agree with the fact that churches before are really powerful. So, in my take, in the other hand, during the Middle Ages, faith wasn't just a Sunday activity, you know. So it was the lens through which almost everyone viewed existence. Um, Miss J was right. That's why I agreed earlier. Very, very powerful. The church's teachings about the heaven, the hell, and purgatory act as the primary moral compass of everything. Thus, the religious institutions wielded immense cultural and political power about it. So, however, the idea that church and science were that they were in a constant war is a bit of historical truth. So, may mga instances talaga na perhaps masasabi na yes, they are against each other, but in reality, the relationship was just a complex, a complex mix of genuine support and occasional friction. So it doesn't mean that they are always like this. Hence the question, for sure. So what are the ways the church promoted inquiry? First is I would like to emphasize the birth of universities. So earlier, during the first round, we discussed how this religious institutions, help develop early universities, and we provided facts about it. So that actually allowed the first universities to thrive. A religion allowed that to thrive. They became hubs, where the 7 liberal arts were debated and refined. Second one there is the preservation of knowledge. So we all know that monasteries were used as the hard drives, okay, of the medieval work. So monks acted as the primary guardians of literacy. Meticulously, they copied and preserved ancient manuscripts that would have otherwise been lost to time if they are not preserved. On the flip side, the church also established the bounds of orthodoxy. So scientific study was generally encouraged, but only if they stayed within the line. So there are always like a line between what to believe, what to share with the public, and if a theory directly contradicted the scripture or the established dogma, it will definitely shut down. And there was actually, I searched online that there was, what we called condemnations of 1277. So this was an event where they displayed their institutional authority, where the Bishop of Paris banned 219 philosophical and scientific propositions. This was a clear message that while curiosity was fine, it could never override the absolute power of God. Now, the medieval church, overall, for this, for my take about this question, the medieval church didn't exactly try to stop, science. Rather, it acted as a rigorous and sometimes strict editor. Hence, the statement I have there. Now, it provided the resources for discovery while simultaneously setting the boundaries for what was considered true.
So, thank you so much, ma'am, for a very insightful discussion. The question was just simple: whether church promote or hinder the pursuit of scientific inquiry. So, based on the discussions from our resource speaker, I would say that the church serves as a supporter and regulator of scientific inquiry in the medieval time. Why is it so? Because during the Middle Ages, the church played a very complex role in the advancement of science. On one hand, it serves as a catalyst for scientific inquiry by supporting education. In what sense? They preserve ancient knowledge and promotes the integration of reason with theology. Since monasteries were already present and even cathedral schools, they become the centers of learning, where subjects like astronomy and medicine were studied alongside theology. Thinkers like Thomas Aquinas used philosophy to reconcile faith with reason, encouraging intellectual exploration. However, the church also acted as a gatekeeper, restricting scientific progress when new ideas contradicted established doctrines. It maintained strict control over intellectual life, often censoring theories that challenge religious belief as seen with the banning of Aristotle's work and other controversial ideas